In this video, I'll show you how you can call a flow from a Power App to then call a REST API that's secured by Azure Active Directory, and finally return a complex type back to PowerApps for use in your Canvas app. So we'll get started here. I'll insert a text input. We'll then insert a button, and then we'll insert a gallery. And let's move this gallery down. And then let's change it to a title-based gallery, and we'll fix this in a second. So the idea here is that we want the text input. So the default, let's go ahead and delete that. We want the text input here passed to a flow when we click this button. The flow will execute. The flow will then call a web service that's secured by Azure Active Directory, and then we'll display the results in the gallery. All right, let's go over and click this button. We'll switch over to actions here and click flows. We don't have any flows to call, so we'll create a new flow. And I will call this get opportunities. Then we'll add a step. In this action, I'll type HTTP here. And you'll notice this HTTP with Azure AD. We want to make an HTTP request. All right, so let's switch over here. Now again, you can use any REST API here that's secured by Azure Active Directory. I happen to be using Dynamics 365. So notice here that I'm executing a query and I'm asking for opportunities whose name contains some value. So for example, if I type IMP here and hit enter, you'll see a subset of data. All right, so this is going to be the value we use for our base resource URL, and then the Azure AD resource URI. Now, depending on the REST API you're calling, this may be different, but in my case, they're the same. So I'll sign in here. All right, now I can actually specify what HTTP method. So I'll come back over here. I'll copy this, come back to my flow. That's the URL I want to execute. Notice the IMP here. We want to replace this with a value we pass in to the flow. So before we do that, let's rename this. We'll call this get opportunities. Then again, I'll highlight the IMP here and click this Ask in PowerApps button. Notice that it creates this get opportunities underscore URL of the request. And what you'll realize is that that's the combination of this action underscore the name of this property here in the action. And right now we don't have the ability to change what this is called. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to. All right, so let's save this real quick and test it out. I'll perform the trigger action, click save and test here. What you'll notice here is that if I type IMP now and run the flow, and we can see the flow activity. And I click test succeeded. You'll see that get opportunities. Oh, it failed. So let's go edit that flow again. Ah, there we go. Let's try that again. This time, let's see There we go. It ran and it returned some results. Okay, great. Now we need to get this back to the Power App. So we'll add another step and add an action, and this action will be the request response action. We'll grab the request response action here. The body is going to be the body of the request. And then we need a JSON schema. So the way we get that is we just grab the raw payload here. So this is the raw response of the REST API call. And then we're going to click Use Sample Payload to generate schema. And I'll paste that in there, click Done. It created a schema. So now I can save this. So now we can close this out and click Get Opportunities here. So on select of this button, we're calling Get Opportunities, and we want to pass it the text box, text input 1 dot text. All right, and then we need to set this variable. So set this to a variable. So let's come over here and we'll say set get opportunities response. And we'll just call this get opportunities dot. And notice that it has a value property. This is the property that actually has the array of results in it. And that's because this REST API uses OData, and that's the structure of an OData response. So we want to grab the value here. And so when this button's clicked, we'll set this variable. And so then we need to go over to the gallery. And actually, let's go back to the button real quick. Copy that, go to the gallery. We'll set its items. There you go. And so let's then edit the gallery's layout. And we want to use the name property in the array. So let's start this up, click the button. It's calling the flow. The flow is returning the data. If I come in here and I type IMP, there you go. If I type CONTOSO, all right, so in this video, I showed you how you can add an action to a button to call a flow. We created a new flow. I click edit here, that flow receives a value that is then used in the HTTP with Azure AD action to make a custom REST API call. And then the results of the API call are returned back to the Power App. Now it's important to note that you should always use an existing connector if it does what you need it to do. But there are edge cases where the connector doesn't quite do what you want it to do, or it doesn't yet call parts of the API that you want to be able to call. And so you can always drop down to using a flow as long as you know how to use the raw API itself, and then use the constructs of flow to return the data back to your Power App.